are back on the Better Advertising with Better Media podcast, and today we are live at House of Amazon, and I am incredibly excited to be sitting down with Jeff Cohen, evangelist of all the things Amazon, and today we're going to be talking about all of the fun things that are happening here at Cannes Lions.
Yeah, super excited. This show is something that I wasn't very aware of before I took my role at Amazon, or at Amazon Ads, and it's something that requires you to see and experience and to really truly understand. And it's more than just a bunch of, people from the advertising industry coming to France. There's deep dive conversations into hot relevant topics. There's lots of celebrity activations. There's lots of just great things that are happening. And like you and I talk about with most shows, the level of conversation that occurs by just bumping into people, seeing them, talking to them, learning about how they're doing their business is truly like inspirational.
Intimacy is a great word to define Cannes. And every single time I go home, I'll get millions of messages, maybe not millions, I'm not Alex Earl here. I'll get quite a few messages of, why do you go to Cannes? Like, what's the value? And, we specifically come for Amazon Port. I mean, that's where we have the majority of our relationships and things like that. But what a lot of people don't understand is you don't send your full team to Cannes. You send the decision makers and the people that matter. And I think that's the same for Amazon. That's the same on agency side, brand side. And that's what's really cool is you're walking down the street and you run into the people that you want to be having conversations with. Or if we just look at House of Amazon, it should be more of a, village of Amazon because you guys have every single team that I would say is really paving the way for the future of Amazon ads.
Yeah, and that's been a growth as well, right? If you came here 3 years ago, there were multiple activations across the beach with different activations of Amazon happening, and we brought them all into one last year, and then we really built upon that this year. And it's a great way to not just meet people from these different groups, but to also experience some of these different properties that maybe you're not as familiar with. Yeah. So within the House of Amazon, they have a setup for Wondery, and you can listen to podcasts and understand how ads are relevant to the podcast and the audience, and then connected back to your brand through the measurement that occurs. And so you get to see these things that are you understand all these individual pieces, but you see how they start to come together when you come here. And so there's booths around Amazon Influencer, Amazon Live, Wondery, Twitch. I'm not going to get them Thursday Night Football or Amazon Sports. I'm not going to remember them all off the top of my head, but it's really cool because while you're between meetings, you can kind of play and interact, and then you can go to a larger session and you can learn how influencers are being integrated in with these campaigns, and then measuring the impact that those campaigns are happening, right? So I know you were really excited. An influencer that was here on Monday, Alex Earl. I probably had to ask 5 people, who is that? But I guess that shows my age versus yours.
100%. I think one of the things that you hit on is integration. When people think of Amazon or Amazon advertising, PPC is still, I think, first and foremost, because a lot of those things historically have been out of touch. To run a national media campaign or to run something on a certain channel, it took a really large budget, or you had to work with a specific team. Amazon's bringing that all together. And when he says it's all here, I mean, you walk into House of Amazon, you walk right by the influencer booth. That's where Jeff found me. And then he said, quote unquote, don't you have to actually be an influencer to take a photo there?
That was Alex that was in front of the booth, not you.
Apparently a LinkedIn influencer does not count in this industry. But we walked past that and it's okay. There's a Summer I Turned Pretty activation. They're doing the Team Conrad or Team Jeremiah bracelets. And they're really making it integrated and involved with the brand. And then you walk by Amazon Music.
Yep.
And when you walk by all of these, you start realizing how accessible they are for your brand.
Right.
And the opportunity that you have, it's no longer working with 20 separate teams to tie together a, full funnel strategy.
Right.
And I think the second half of that, which we've been talking a lot, anyone who's followed Jeff and I, it is attribution, it's AMC, it's how do you tie all of these pieces together?
Yeah, Amazon for, I'll say, traditional digitally native brands on Amazon have really understood how performance marketing works on Amazon. And it's been very ROAS, ACOS, tacos focused, right? All these terms that we really coined, which are all based on last touch attribution. Yeah. And as Amazon has grown and matured and brought all of their properties into the advertising mix, it's been important for brands and even, brands that have been like first movers to be thinking beyond ROAS. Yeah. And it's an easy kind of buzzword to kind of be talking about on stage and be like, you need to think beyond ROAS. But what does that mean? It means that you need to be thinking beyond last touch attribution. That's like its simplest form. And as you start to think about last touch attribution, that means that the last ad that somebody saw gets credit for the acquisition that occurs. But when you do that, you limit yourself to all of the other things that happened in the life of that particular consumer. And so when you start to actually look at the consumer journey using a tool like Amazon Marketing Cloud, and you start to see all these other touch points that are occurring, you can start to actually build in a multi-touch attribution type model to understand the impact that these other signals are having on your marketing. So it's not just about being on a podcast, it's about a podcast audience being part of a user's journey, and then you can buy all that through Amazon in your different marketing activations.
And if none of that made sense to you, no, Jeff broke it down incredibly well. But one of the people that we spoke to earlier this week was Ekta from Elf Beauty.
Yep.
And in the simplest fashion, we dove into the Super Bowl campaign that Elf ran. And I love that as a use case here because Super Bowl is kind of your biggest upper funnel initiative. Everyone knows how expensive Super Bowl slots are. Everyone knows the type of awareness they drive, but most people don't necessarily correlate it with profitability or direct success on any platform. But last year, Elf ran their campaign on their sticky primer, and immediately within, I think, 7 days from my own tracking, just because I'm a fangirl, they became number one in, I believe, all of beauty. And I could be wrong. This is again my personal tracking.
I heard their CMO say this, and I probably won't have it exactly correct, but it was like they were the first product that they had like taken over mascara, which is the number one beauty product in the top. It owns like all 10 spots of the top 10.
Yes.
And they were not just broke into that top 10, but we're number one with that new primer product.
And the reason I want to call that out is because we're talking about attribution and multi-touch attribution. And these are two platforms that you would not assume communicate. Super Bowl campaign and number one seller on Amazon. There's not a lot of ways to overlap attribution historically in this use case, but Elf came to the table with this really crazy initiative. They were able to directly correlate success, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So when Jeff is mentioning the opportunity to go live with a Twitch streamer, or to speak on a podcast, if you put the Super Bowl ad in a silo, it probably wasn't traditionally profitable. It may not have driven D2C or any other platform, but when you look at it as a whole, you can see how all of these things start connecting. I mean, as a consumer here, I have my 17-year-old sister going to TikTok and seeing the new lip oil, and then I walk in a room and she forces me to buy it, and I go to Amazon to buy it. And then I see it on Instagram, which makes me want to buy more products. And
well, we had before AMC, BAMC, make a new acronym.
Okay, we don't need any more of those in Amazon world.
Before AMC, we used to just look at signals that were occurring. So we would look for maybe a unique, so for the primer, it was a search term that had a uniqueness to it, right? You could say sticky primer. I would assume that pre the launch of that product, sticky primer wasn't getting a lot of searches. No. You could then look and see how many searches were occurring, and you could draw the conclusion back that your campaign was working. And that was how a lot of people were measuring influencer campaigns in general. But it was difficult if that was, just the word primer, because primer could be any number of things on Amazon, and it's difficult to know whether your campaign is impacting that. But now that you can actually start to measure things like new to brand customers, and you can start looking at things like store visits to understand where people are in their journey, you can actually start to attribute other attributions to campaigns that you're running and not just focus in on that end goal. And I think it's it's a testament, I think, to where the overall industry has kind of grown to. It's a testament to where I think the evolution of brands and the maturity of brands and their marketing tactics have grown to. And I think it's also an excitement of like what the future has, because it's still really a day one type moment, because this discovery is just happening for so many brands.
Yeah. I think it's incredibly important to kind of talk about the two principles here. One is that we have access to these insights. I think that's one of the biggest things is brands need to start dabbling and figuring out how they can tell their story better and not just look at last touch. You know, we have linear that you can pull first touch. There's a million different things that we can dive into, but it's not getting overwhelmed with those insights and being incredibly proactive. So something we've discussed a lot is how do you take that and you make it actionable?
Yep.
And I think that's another whole value add when it comes just to AMC. I mean, from the audience perspective, we can start curating that path to purchase from that first sponsored TV or that streaming TV ad that we're showcasing that is very informative, very educational. You know, what is sticky primer?
Right.
What is the difference? And then being able to back into those insights is the valuable part. But I have seen a lot of people get overwhelmed. It's a great buzzword in the space. So
yeah, well, I think what happens is that, you know, AMC has been around for several years now. And at first we were just trying to figure out what is AMC and why does it matter? And now
what is a marketing cloud?
Right. And now there are a lot of people still trying to figure that out. It's still a newer product into the marketing mix. But now you are getting to this point where brands that have been using it for a year or 2 years or more are working heavier on the I was learning the insights, right? That's kind of like the opening of the door, is that AMC gives you these insights, and then the what do I do with them is the how do you take the insights and turn them into actions. And that's where I think you're starting to get this brand evolution starting to occur. It's not too late though for the brands who aren't doing this, because
it's honestly the perfect time to hop in, because
it is.
It's 100% more accessible in my opinion. A lot of your newer rollouts just directly within ad console, from a usability perspective, it's 10x, and you don't necessarily need SQL in the future to access some of the information.
Yes, and I think, you know, I've met with numerous brands here at the show, and you know, I'm somewhat surprised but not always shocked at how many of them are just getting started with AMC.
Not everyone can be a first mover.
Correct. And I think that's something that's important, and it's something that kind of grounds me as somebody who speaks a lot to the industry. Like, we are always challenged with coming out with new content. But we also have to remember that people are still catching up with the things because it wasn't right for them and their mix to be using it at that time. And so I agree with you. There's no better time if you're not using it to be using it. And if you are, there's opportunities to double down with it as you're seeing the signals that are driving your business and figuring out where you want to make those additional investments.
100%. I think the key part here across all of Amazon ads, and we can dive really deep in this area, is just accessibility. One thing that Jeff and I have always talked about is the test and learn mentality.
Yep.
And something that's really exciting is like, let's take sponsored TV really fast, just 'cause I think that's one of the easiest use cases here. You're giving brands the opportunity to run a TV campaign. You're assisting with some of the creative.
Yep.
You're giving them the ability to run it with no minimums.
Right.
No commitments. Now, I'm going to do a little caveat, asterisk here, that if you don't spend enough money, you're not going to drive enough value to derive.
There's a right time to be doing it. There's a right time to be doing it. There's an investment
Yes.
that needs to be made to get the results that you desire,
Yes.
right? But there is no
100%.
minimum to be able to do it.
Yes, and there's no longer that risk. You know, historically, when AMG was the acronym of the time, it was a little bit more Amazon Media Group. It was a little bit more difficult.
Wait, what's AMG?
AMG. It's so many acronyms. Can we have a talk with leadership at some point?
Yeah.
But when you used to run those historical, more upper funnel initiatives, sometimes it was hard to justify the insights that you wanted to see because they weren't necessarily openly accessible.
Right.
But now you can run that sponsored TV campaign. You can run it within a minimum you're comfortable with, and then you have the direct opportunity to derive the insights that you need. And it's no longer just about ROAS. You'll hear us talk about that all the time because it's a full funnel campaign that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think that overall this is the growth of our whole industry. It's the growth of even like 1P, first party brands on Amazon And there's the availability and the accessibility and the democratization. And, these are all buzzwords, but they all truly mean that you as a brand have access to something that was maybe harder to access in the past. And I think that's part of what Amazon wants to do, right?
Yeah.
We want to democratize these things. We understand that the consumer is moving to streaming, right? Streaming television took over linear TV in 2023, but the audience of streaming is different than the audience of linear. And that's an important fact for us to remember. Brands are just now really trying to understand, like, how does Gen Z, how do the younger generations interact with their brand? They interact differently, right? And so how do they interact with their brand, and what do they need to be doing different to interact with them and to engage them with their brand? They have to have purpose behind their brand when you're talking to that age group. They have different things that are important to them than, like, say, somebody like me, right?
Yeah. Who
maybe shops in a more traditional type of way, used to go to a mall to buy things and understands things in a different way. Yeah. And so, I consider myself, we were having a great conversation last night around, like, streaming television and advertising and, like, how ads interact with streaming TV, because I have all of the services with ads because I like to see how each one is working different, just so I can be more educated to talk about it. And it is really interesting how the streaming services are beginning to figure out what ads need to look like. And I think that's where Amazon is trying to be innovative, right? Mm-hmm. We're rolling out pause ads so that we have less disruption in the programming that you're watching. But when you do pause to get up and go to the kitchen and grab something, there's ads running. But then those ads become interactive, right? You can run brand trivia campaigns, ability to run ads based on the audience that's watching. So you can buy one spot for, Amazon Thursday Night Football, but you can have different ads that are running based on the demographics that you're trying to go after for different products in your product mix. And all of these things create more flexibility for the brand that make these investments more worthwhile, more engaging to the audience that they're trying to attract, and then be able to measure the results, right? And I think that's ultimately what we all want to do.
And the innovation here is key. I mean, there's definitely strong opportunity for first movers in the space. We've seen it across the board, but it can be scary. It can be scary to take this bet. A lot of companies, from an org chart perspective, I don't think are necessarily built to work with the rate of innovation that Amazon's pushing in the space. I mean, growing a team myself in Amazon, it's difficult because so many things are changing so quickly. But I think that's less, Amazon and more just the generations in the industry, e-commerce in general. My Gen Z sister, like, they move quick. So we have to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think when you talk to brands like Elf, they go really deep into that, right? Because they lean into that heavily because it's part of their culture. And I think for a lot of brands, as they're developing their corporate culture and understanding how it evolves, that includes their relationship with agencies and tech partners and media outlets like Amazon, right? And you have to look at all of them within the partnership of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to build your brand. And then, we're built for speed and you're built for speed, but sometimes the brand isn't built for speed. And having that mix of what that looks like and how to build a repetitive process that allows you to move faster, it's okay to not be built for speed at the beginning. Yeah. You have to become comfortable with what you're doing. You have to be comfortable with the investments. You have to be comfortable with the return on investment, however you're choosing to measure it. But as you're seeing that, that's where you want to start to build, internally we call them mechanisms. That's where you want to build mechanisms that allow you to speed up your process. So understand that process might be slower at the beginning because you are learning, you are venturing into new territory. But how do you move that along faster over time so that once you do get up to full speed, you can move super quick and you can actually turn that into a competitive advantage for your brand?
And if we're being honest, the innovation and the rate of change in the space is solely the reason I think Jeff and I have jobs to this day. Because in order to innovate and to test, you have to educate and understand. And that's why e-commerce is difficult, is because it takes a whole different level of education and it's rapidly moving. So the moment you learn one thing, there's something new that's being rolled out.
Well, and what we were learning and how we were learning this 8 years ago was just different because Amazon worked in a different way. And so I think that all of this is just moving at a faster pace. The consumer is changing. The way we interact with technology is changing. The technology that we have access to. This is the longest I've been on a podcast without mentioning the word AI, right? But AI is, right? You wanted to not go there. But that's changing the way we are evolving. And all these things lead back to that culture of your brand to be able to bring these into your mix to drive the results that you want. Yeah. And the other thing that I really try to ground and remind myself on a regular basis is that we have to continue to educate people and remind them, because there's so many things that they're doing on a daily basis that aren't involved with maybe Amazon in the same way that we are. And so you have to remind them that, like, hey, posts are really interactive and they are driving a lot of value and they're worth the investment. And they've had several changes that have occurred in the last year by the ability to bring in video, the ability to take a post and boost it. And all of a sudden, you know, somebody who's maybe not eating, sleeping, and drinking Amazon like we do gets woken up to something that they haven't heard, or is reminded of something else they can be doing to be building their brand and expanding their brand footprint.
And our ability to tie it in, I think, is what's brought us here to an Amazon podcast. But taking Amazon posts, for example, it's slightly different than any other social media. It's evergreen, I think, is one of the biggest value adds. When you post on any other social, you get all your likes within 14 hours, and then you don't hear from anyone ever again. Amazon posts are posted, and they consistently drive reach. They're free, which is a huge value add.
They're free.
We have multiple brands, I think, at this point, are millions of impressions being driven from posts that we're just utilizing from a UGC perspective. We have a great system for it. And then you layer in the follow button, which is showcased on post. And that's another potential opportunity to tie in from a long-term perspective. Social commerce, I think, is another big buzzword that we're seeing. Last year was a really big topic. And here as well is, how do you tie in the shopping journey with the social commerce and the lives and kind of that opportunity? And it's like, Amazon posts also touch on that.
They do. And you know, one of the big themes at the show this year is a lot stronger around influencers, right? We were kind of joking about that at the beginning. And I think that's another great example of 2-3 years ago, influencers were a theme here at Cannes, but we weren't really sure what the value of influencers were, how influencers built into the mix, how you measured the results of influencers. I feel like the influencer level here at Cannes has really, and because we have evolved as brands in terms of how to use them, right? So whether it's the e.l.f. campaign you mentioned earlier, using Judge Judy within their Judge Beauty campaign, or, you know, whether it's, you know, John Legend, who's here, but also has a brand that he launched on Amazon, and, you know, or whether it's Alex, what's her name?
Alex Earl.
Alex Earl, see? Not my generation. Who's, you know, doing this through her own social influence. They have such a power. And one of the things that I think is cool about, you know, the power of influencers isn't necessarily about the super mega influencers, which is what you get a little bit more of here. It's also that there's that power of the micro influencer that still exists, and be able to drive an overall community for your brand.
Well, it's no longer just about being a celebrity. And that's kind of a fun delineation, the difference in an influencer and the difference in a celebrity. And yeah, they can be one and the same. But to your point, we have the ability to connect with people from a social media perspective and follow their whole lives. It's not, you don't need paparazzi now to stay up to date with the hottest celebrity. You have a platform that allows you to connect. And that connection, I think, has driven a change to more authentic relationships from a brand perspective, from a how we reach our audience. We can hyper target and be a lot more authentic with the people we're connecting with. It's no longer a national media TV campaign that's overly broad. It's no longer a newspaper or a mail campaign. We can say, hey, I really resonate with this certain demographic, this certain audience. Let me curate an experience specifically towards them.
Yeah, my wife, I woke up to my wife full of text messages about a Peloton instructor who was here that she works out with and engages with. And in her world, this Peloton. I don't even remember who it is. I'd have to look it up. Maybe her name was Jess or something like that. In her world, like that is, the most,
the celebrity.
The celebrity for her. And it was just funny because she thought she may have been on my flight because we flew through the same city because we're the only two people
on that flight.
Right. But like to her, that's really important. And to her, what she does and what she promotes and what she engages with is really important to my wife. Alex is important to your sister. And each of us find these people to connect into in a very meaningful way. Just like, not to put us at the same level as that, but there's people who will look to you for that inspiration or that motivation, across LinkedIn to understand what's happening within the Amazon community as well. And so it's kind of like, how does it happen with big brands? How does it happen with us as with smaller brands? How does it happen with us in the Amazon community? Yeah. And I think that's, one of the things that's really being highlighted throughout this whole event is just that power and that connectivity that can occur.
So if I were to summarize Can and House of Amazon, it's connections, relationships, authenticity, and
measurement.
Yeah. I was going to say integration, but measurement's definitely the piece that brings it all together. Absolutely. I think that's always been missed historically. Everyone's been dabbling in these areas, but now we have the puzzle pieces that can really come together and paint the picture, for lack of a better term. And that's the value of Can.
Yes. That and the concert.
In the concert.
But
mic drop.